Привit, moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I am a professor who has been focused on what's been going on in Ukraine for better than a year. In the first few days, I started paying attention as soon as Zelensky was saying, "I need ammunition, not a ride," and then I studied him in some great detail, and then I kept updating a Kindle ebook that I created about Zelensky within a few weeks, and I updated it for the first 4 months of the war. After that, I shifted gears into YouTube daily updates and just have been doing that ever since. A few days ago, I saw a interesting article in the BBC, and it was about the 35-mile column. Now, as I'm recording this, it is March 1st of 2023. On March 1st of 2022, we saw this huge line of tanks. You probably remember it if you were paying attention to the news at the time. This huge line, 35, almost 40 miles long, of tanks going from Belarus down into trying to attack Kyiv. And what was interesting about this was that convoy. I was thinking, wow, that's a lot of tanks. But I was thinking, like, isn't that vulnerable? Like, isn't that a bad way of doing this? I'm no military expert, but I have some answers now, and I can try to answer why it was a bad idea, why it failed, what was going on. And okay, so here we go. So the attack is launched, and there's this huge convoy on the roads. Well, why are they on the roads? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, the mechanized vehicles, the tires, or sometimes even the tank's treads would get caught in the mud. And so instead of going like in this massive wave, they actually had to all merge onto a road and get in this long column, which was not the original plan, but that's what they had to do. Along that way, once that column was established, you could stop the column very easily by defending, throwing Molotov cocktails at the first couple of vehicles and blowing them up, or if you had a javelin or whatever. So these guys were aware of that. They understood this column's going obviously direction toward Kyiv, and so if you could knock out the first few vehicles, it would cause this traffic jam. Or if you could blow a bridge, and you could blow a bridge along the way, there were a number of them, and that would stop the column. And they'd have to create a pontoon bridge, and it would slow things down. So when the vehicles first started rolling over the border, the Ukrainian army was aware that they were coming, and they were wise not to like spark an engagement with Belarus. They were paying attention, seeing what they were doing, actively trying to understand what their enemy was doing, rather than do something so close to the border. But once they started getting in, and again, there were 10 Russian battle tank tactical units, and so there's a lot of armor coming along over the bridge. With the armor are support trucks and food and fuel and other things along those lines. Now, here's the fascinating thing. The commanders themselves did not know that they were going to attack Kyiv until 24 hours beforehand. There was incredible secrecy. So 2 days, 3 days beforehand, they didn't know that they were going to be doing this. They thought that they were doing these war games. And so this timetable to advance on Kyiv was like, 3 days you're supposed to be inside Kyiv, and within a couple weeks you're going to take the city. By the way, it was the same thing on the southern front. And so on the southern front, they attacked from Crimea, and they went out east toward Mariupol, and they went out west over into Kherson. And that bridge over the water going into Kherson city was supposed to be blown, but it wasn't blown. The timetable there, and I just recently found this out, this wasn't from this particular BBC article, the timetable there was in just 3 or 4 days, they were supposed to be in Odessa. And what's on the other side of Odessa? Well, Moldova and the breakaway area of Transnistria. So Putin had some pretty big ambitions with this special military operation. Okay, at any rate, secrecy and speed was key. The commanders only knew about 24 hours in advance. So because they only knew, and it was planned all top down rather than let the commanders kind of think about what they needed to have, they lacked food, they lacked fuel, they lacked necessary supplies. And because they lacked these things, they had to pillage the people along the way where they could. So that's not something that the people were terribly excited about. And the people had come out with small arms fire, with Molotov cocktails. They would park things in the, put erect barriers in the streets. So the people were adamant against this. Zelensky had taken his stand already, and so he was saying, go out and stop this. And the people were already willing to do that. So you have to have both of these parts, right? If Zelensky had fled, this would have fallen apart. If the people were like, I don't want any part of this, go ahead, it would have fallen apart. But because you had both of those things lining up, it could work. So the soft ground caused them to converge on the actual roads, and they're going in a column about 35 miles. They're running out of food and fuel. And when they get to Bucha, the people in Bucha are taking the roadsides down to confuse them. They're setting up these barriers, setting vehicles on fire. They're stalling the whole convoy each time that they can cause a disruption or blow a bridge where necessary or whatever. Now, what you know about Bucha is Bucha was known for atrocities. Well, the Russian soldiers were taking out their wrath on the civilians who were trying to stop them. And so Bucha is now known infamously for attacks on unarmed civilians or binding civilians and killing them or whatever. And so it was bad. But here's what I want you to understand. There was a decentralized effort on the Ukrainian side to come out and harass these troops. The military was doing the same kind of thing. The military was actively working on that column while civilians were also creating headaches for them. The commanders didn't know what to do because every time they got stalled, they knew, like, here's our plan, but they weren't part of the planning process. And so they were out trying to execute someone else's plan that may or may not have equipped them. And that's like, so there's multiple levels of points of failure in leadership, right? It was all top down. The people executing the plan didn't have any like real say in how they were going to execute the plan. They lacked food, they lacked fuel, they lacked whatever. The other side was supposed to welcome them with flowers, and they were coming out with Molotov cocktails instead. Or as Anna from Ukraine has eloquently said, they brought flowers for their graves, which is different entirely. And again, the commanders didn't know what to do because while they knew where their ultimate goal was supposed to be, if they got blocked from the goal, well, what do we do? How do we get where we're trying to go? Some of the maps fell into Ukrainian hands, and when the maps fell into Ukrainian hands, now the Ukrainians knew exactly where they were going and what they were trying to do so they could erect as many obstacles as possible. And so the convoy was stopped just outside of Kyiv, just past Bucha, but just outside Kyiv. And it took about 4 weeks before they turned back, but ultimately they turned back. There was enough of harassment because they should never have been in a single file column going all the way through. That was never the intent, but they had to do that because they were getting bogged down. So for all these reasons, multiple points of failure affected the Russian invasion, and the planners should have known better. But the planners were few and far between. Remember, Putin kept this close to, and go back to yesterday or the day before, what I was been talking about. Putin kept this really close to his own chest. He didn't let secrecy was core to this invasion. He didn't let others know. By the way, while I'm at that, I'm going to apologize to RT for how hard I was on RT for what they broadcast about how, see, we're not going to invade, the Americans might invade, but we're not going to invade. Okay, before the invasion, they didn't even know, right? So I apologize to RT for that. Everything you said after the invasion was a bunch of lies, and you should be ashamed of yourself for it. But before that, even RT didn't know. So the invasion, like, and again, everybody that I know was like, nah, Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. I remember sitting around the cafeteria talking to my professor colleagues, talking about, well, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think Putin wants out of this deal? What do you think he's trying to really get? Because he's not going to invade, certainly. Well, I mean, joke's on us. We found out that that's what was going to happen. But his commanders would have had the same inclination just 24 hours before to have had the same conversation. So that's what was going on there. And I think it's really interesting and insightful to understand that even his commanders didn't know what was going to happen just before the invasion happened. And with that being the case, man, you can just see how things could spiral out of control. So your job as a leader is to make the right call, see around the corner, have the foresight to see what's going to happen, make sure that your people have the supplies that they need to carry out the activity, make sure that you remove the obstacles in their way and let them do their thing. And on so many fronts, um, Putin and his planners have failed on that. And that's why the invasion didn't work so well. Okay, I hope that helps you understand what happened with that 35-mile column. I'm talking about a number of kind of big picture ideas. I'm going to talk about the culture in Russia because I keep getting asked, is Putin, if you eliminated Putin, what would Russia be okay, or is it there's something in the culture? And I'm going to talk about that really soon. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being willing to listen to me, and thank you for caring about Ukraine.